That's what I've heard, the alternative. Oh. Shabbat Shalom, how's the sound? Are there not, in the foyer, isn't there, on the table, aren't there hearing packs? Yes. I thought I saw them one time when I was going back and forth between sanctuary. So how is this? Is this okay? And I realize I'm missing my, so I'm going to do everything from up here today.
Yeah, it must be in the back.
You know, last night we were outside, so it's probably somewhere in the social hall, but that's okay. We'll be fine. I don't think so. Will you be okay if we do the whole thing from me very far away from you? That's good. Okay. Good.
It's not good, but it'll work.
It'll work. It'll work. So for those of you who have yet to put your talit on, we're going to turn to page 190 in our, as we say this blessing. Bless Adonai, O my soul. Adonai, my God, how great you are. You are robed in glory and majesty, wrapping yourself as in a garment, spreading forth the heavens like a curtain. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit. As we turn to page 192. 192. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Remember I taught you about how to count for 10? Va'ani berov chastecha ahavo ve'techa eshtachave el heichol kodshecha b'yiratecha. We made it. On page 194. Praise to you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei chol basar umafli la'asot. On page 196. Elohai nishama shenatata bi tehorahi. 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 Elohai neshama shenatata biteho rahi. On the bottom of page 197, my soul came to me pure, drawn from the reservoir of the holy. All the time it remains within me, I am thankful for its thirst, for compassion and justice. Let my eyes behold the beauty of all creatures. Let my hands know the privilege of righteous deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, asher biado nefesh kol chai, v'ruach kol besar ish. And we turn to our Nisim B'chol Yom, our everyday miracles. And before we recite the ones that are written for us, I would invite anyone to share some daily miracle or not so daily good thing that's happening in your life. Victor, you have something to share?
Yes. I started a new program at the physical therapy. Okay? And you should go to another place. Okay? And then I sort of found out from a couple of friends, try one at the hospital. Okay? They are 99 more professional than the other place I went to.
Good. So
Okay?
the new program is doing much better for you.
I am very happy that I attended that.
Amen. Other good things in our lives? Hi, Michael. Mazal tov. Amen. Well, I will share the good news that we closed on our house in Illinois yesterday. So we are only residents of New Jersey with one house, and I'm delighted. And that is a not so daily, but definitely miracle. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech bivina lahavchin ben yom uben laila. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten layaev koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hama'avir sheina meinai utnuma me'afapai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tselem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani bat chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tif'ara. On the top of page 204. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of your Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants and descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamalameh Torah le'amo Yisrael. On page 206. Elu divarim she'en lahem shi'ur. Elu divarim she'en lahem shi'ur. Elu divarim she'en lahem shi'ur. Ve'elu hein. These are things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world, while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. We continue on page 215, 215. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha, od yehalelucha selah. Ashrei ha'am shekacha lo, Ashrei ha'am shadonai Eloha. Tila leDavid, aromimcha Elohai hamelech, ve'avarcha shimcha leolam va'ed. B'chol yom avarchecha, ve'alela shimcha leolam va'ed. Gadol Adonai umhulal me'od, v'ligdulato ein cheker. Dor ledor yishabach mahasecha, ugvrotecha yagidu. Hadar kevod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha. Ve'ezuz norotecha yomeru, udgulatcha asaprenam. Zecher rav tuvcha yahabiu, v'tzidchatcha yiranenu. Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erech apayim ugdol chesed. Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Yoduch Adonai kol ma'asecha, v'chasidecha yivarchucha. Kevod malchutcha yomeru, ugvuratcha yidaberu. Lehodia lifnei hadam gevurotav, ukvod hadar malchuto. Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, umem shaltecha bechol dor vador. Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim, v'zochef lechol hakfufim. Ata noten lahem et ochlam b'ito, poteach et yadecha, umaspiach lechol chai ratzon. Tzadik Adonai b'chol derachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav. Karov Adonai lechol korav, lechol asher yikra'uhu ve'emet. Ritzon yire'av yaseh, ve'et shavatam nishma v'yoshiem. Shomer Adonai et kol oavav, ve'et kol ashaim yashmid. Tilat Adonai yidaber pi, vivarech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed. V'anachnu nivarech yam, me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah. We continue on page 224. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabal, ve'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala, uv'izman kariv, v'yimeru amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevorach, le'olam ulon mehamaya, yitbarach, yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal, shemei dekudesha b'richu, le'la min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran b'yama, v'yimeru amen. On page 226. As we're able, we rise for Baruch Hu. Ya la 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 ya la 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 la, ya la 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 ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la la ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la, ya la 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 la. Baruchu et Adonai hamivorach. Baruch Adonai hamivorach, hamivorach le'olam va'ed, hamivorach, hamivorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim aleha barachamim, uvtuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit. Ma rabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita, mala ha'aretz kinyanecha. Titbarach Adonai Eloheinu, al shevach ma'aseh yadecha, ve'al me'orei or she'asita yifarucha selah. Or chadash al Zion ta'ir v'nizkeh chulanu mehera le'oro. Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'me'orot. On page 231. Once or twice in a lifetime, a man or woman may choose a radical leaving, having heard, Lech Lecha, go forth. God disturbs us toward our destiny by hard events and by freedom's now urgent voice, which explode and confirm who we are. We don't like leaving, but God loves becoming. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher bi'amo Yisrael bi'ahava. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. May be seated. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadivarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom alevavecha V'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta b'ham, v'shivtecha b'veitecha, uv'lechtecha v'derech, uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha, uv'kshartam le'ot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot bein einecha, uv'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha, uvisharecha, leman tizkeru, va'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'tem kedoshim lelohechem, ani asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem lelohim, ani Adonai Elohechem. On page 239. The eternal truth is that you alone are God, and there is none else. May the righteous of all nations rejoice in your love and exult in your justice. Let them beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Let nation not lift up sword against nation, nor learn war any more. You shall not hate your brother or your sister in your heart. The stranger that sojourns with you shall be accepted as your equal, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Why do you crush my people and oppress the poor, asks God. We know that the Eternal One defends the poor and upholds the rights of the needy. Praise to God Most High. Blessed is God and deserving of blessing. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, norat tehilot osef elem, norat tehilot osef elem. Shira chadasha shibechu gehulim, lishimcha sfat hayam, yachad kulam hodu, vehimlichu ve'ameru, Adonai yimlo leolam va'ed, Adonai yimlo leolam va'ed. So Yisrael, kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, uvdechinu mecha, Yehuda ve'Yisrael. Go aleinu, Adonai Tzebahot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. On 242, as we're able, we rise for tefillah. Adonai sifatai tivta, ufia gitehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chastei Avot v'Imahot, U'mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, Leman Shemo B'Ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, V'Ezrat Sarah. Atah Gibor Leolam Adonai, Mechaye Hakol atah, Rav leHoshia, morid hatal, mechakel chaim bechesed, mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, somech noflim verofech cholim, umatir asurim, umekayim emunato, lishenei afar, nichamocha ba'al gevurot, umido melach, melech memit, umechayeh, umatzmiach Yeshua, v'ne'eman ata la'achayot hakol, Baruch ata Adonai, mechayeh hakol. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, keshem shemakdishim oto bishmei marom, kakatuv al yad nevi'echa, v'kara ze el ze ve'amar, kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Melocho haaretz, Kevodo, Adir, Adirenu, Adonai, Adonenu, Mahadir, Shimcha b'chol haaretz, Baruch Kevod Adonai, Mimkomo. Echad hu Eloheinu, hu Avinu, hu Malkeinu, hu Moshienu, v'hu Yashmienu, v'rachamav le'nei kol chai. Ani Adonai Elohechem, imloch Adonai le'olam, Elohayich Tzion, Ledor vador, Hallelujah. Ledor vador nagid god lecha, ulenetzach netzachim kedushatcha nahdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu, mipinu lo yamush leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el ha'kadosh. May be seated. On page 250, 50. Yismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, oneg Shabbat. Mekadashei, Mekadashei Shevi Shabbat, Kulam Yisbe'u, V'yitangu mituvecha Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, oneg Shabbat. V'hashvi ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat, chemdat yamim oto karata Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, 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 Shabbat v'korei, oneg Shabbat. Zecher lemaseh, Lema'aseh v'reishit Shabbat. Zecher lema'aseh, lema'aseh v'reishit Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat v'kor. Oneg Shabbat, Yismechu v'malechutecha, shomrei, shomrei Shabbat, v'korei oneg Shabbat. On page 253. We offer thanks, O God, for this Shabbat, which unites us in faith and hope, for Shabbat holiness, which inspires sacred living, for Shabbat memories glowing even in darkness, for Shabbat peace born of friendship and love. We offer thanks and blessing, O God. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. On page 255. Ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy in our deeds and our prayer, wherever we live, wherever we seek you, in this land, in Zion restored, in all lands. You are our God, whom alone we serve in reverence. Baruch atah Adonai, Sha'otecha levadcha b'yira na'avod. On page 257. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations. Modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons. Modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements. Modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work justice in the midst of hostility and oppression. Modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared. Modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom. Modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose. Modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Blessed are you, Adonai. Your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha l'chana elehodot. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed, chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Chen v'chesed, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, v'rachamim. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amecha. Sim shalom. Tova uracha. Sim shalom. Tova uvracha. We continue our prayer silently, whether we are led by the words on the pages through page 261 or other prayers throughout the prayer book, for those meditations and thoughts in our hearts. Adonai Tsuri ve'go'alim. Yehud ratzon imrefi. Yehud ratzon imrefi. Libi lefanecha. Adonai Tsuri ve'go'alim. We turn now in our service to Seder Kriyat Torah for the reading of the Torah, and so we turn in our Siddur to page 362, page 362 in the Siddur. As we are able, we rise, and Larry, if you would please come and help with the Ark and Torah. Devarim haolam, haolam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam, haolam omed. Our Torah portion this Shabbat is Akev, and I'm going to be reading from chapter 7 of Deuteronomy, verse 17 and following. Chapter 7, verse 17 and following. If you'd like to follow along in the Plowed Chumash, we're on page 1379. Page 1379. And if you have something good that's happened in your life that you want to have the Aliyah, or it's just your week for the Aliyah, please feel free to volunteer. Okay, and your Hebrew name, Michael? Moshe. Ben? And your parents? Yeah, okay. Nala Amod Moshe Ben, you said Yisrael? Yisrael Levarech Ala Torah. Baruch Adonai Barach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch HaMarach Le'olam Va'ed. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Baruch Adonai HaMarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai. Amen. Ki tomar bilvavecha rabim hagoyim ha'ela mimeni. Eicha uchal lahorisham lo tira mehem. Zachor tizchor et asher asa Adonai Elohecha lefaro ulechol Mitzrayim hamasot hagadolot asher ra'u einecha v'ha'otot hamoftim v'hayad hachazaka v'hazroa hanetuya asher hotziacha Adonai Elohecha. Ken ya'asa Adonai Elohecha l'chol ha'amim asher ata yirei mifnehem v'gam et ha'tzira yishlach Adonai Elohecha bam ad avod ha'nisharim v'ha'nistarim mipanecha lo ta'arotz mipnehem ki Adonai Elohecha b'kirbecha el gadol v'norah v'nishal Adonai Elohecha et hagoyim ha'el mipanecha me'at me'at lo tuchal klotam maher pen tirbe alecha chayat hasabdeh Untanam Adonai Elohecha lefanecha, v'hamam mehuma gedola ad hishamdam, v'natan malchehem biyadcha, v'avadata et shamam, metachat hashamayim, lo lityatsev ish bifanecha ad hishmidcha otam. Blessing afterward. Amen. And we turn our thoughts and prayers now to those who are in need of healing. And so we turn in our Siddur to page 371 in the middle of the page. For those of you who are watching through the blessing of technology and participating in our service this way, feel free to write in the comments or the chat the names of those people whom you're thinking of at this time who are in need of healing. As we mention aloud these people in our extended Adith Emmanuel family who are in need of healing: Sarah Drasnin, Coco Aguilar, Jonathan Shapiro, Ron Fisher, Jeff Schaefer, Lulu Rivuela, Marion Gwertz, Erin Tepper, Lily Tepper, Joan Major, Karen Bowen, Louis Alahut, Mary Parker, Barbara Cohn, Tricia Tepper, Jordan Maverick Steinberg, Carol Schaefer, Harriet Rosenberg, Hudson Hodge, Carrie Basin, Dr. Jerry Herman, Todd Pollard, Murray Kammerman, Mary Mednitsky, Jocelyn Jackson, Jen Jones, Shirley Friedlander, Michael Infanti, Gary Garnick, Sarah Oken, Ann Marsden, Jerry Dreskin, Lynn Romsberg, Rick Ulrich, Ileana Cohn, and others whom we're thinking of who are in need of healing, whether it's a healing of the body or a healing of the spirit for those who are present in the sanctuary, if you have other names to add at this time. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei HaCholim. Mishabirach Avoteinu, Mekor HaBracha, Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu, Mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. We rise now as we're able, as we lift and dress Torah. Torah Sher Sam Moshe, V'zot HaTorah, Lifnei B'nei I'm looking for our wireless microphone, and I think it traveled to another part of the synagogue during a program earlier in the week. So, if you feel comfortable coming up, I would invite you to come to this microphone. As we turn now to our Haftarah for this morning, we can find it in our plowed chumash on page 1599, the Haftarah for Akev. It comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 49 and following. And once again, we're in this period of consolation following Tisha B'Av. So last week was Nachamu, Shabbat Nachamu, the Sabbath of comfort. And now we're in the second week out of 7 in which our Haftarah readings come from the book of Isaiah, offering comfort to the people when in Isaiah's time they were in a place of exile, feeling a sense of loss and distance from God, that indeed God will draw near, God will be there for them. It's up to them or us, because this is a timeless message, to reach out to God, and God will reach back to us. So we turn now to the blessings, first on page 372 in our Siddur. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hane'amarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv'Moshe avdo uv'Yisrael amo uv'nvi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek.
Zion says, the Eternal has forsaken me. My sovereign has forgotten me. Can a mother forget her babe or stop loving the child of her womb? Even these could forget, but I could not forget you. Indeed, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hands. Your safety is continually in my thoughts. Your builders drive out your destroyers, and those who wrought havoc with you depart from you. Look up and see, they are gathering and coming to you, all of them. As I live, says the Eternal One, you shall put all of them on the ornaments. You shall bind them on yourself like a bride. Your ruins, your abandoned places, your desolated lands shall soon be crowded with people, while those who sought to devour you shall be far off. Then children you have mourned shall yet say in your hearing, this place is too crowded for us. Make room for us to dwell in. And you shall thank who bore all those children for me when I was mourning and childless, exiled and left by the road, and who brought these up. I was all alone. Where did they come from? Thus says the Eternal God, I lift my hand to the nations. I raise my ensign to the peoples. They shall cradle your sons in their arms and carry your daughters on their shoulders. Kings shall serve them for you. Their queens shall nurse them for you. They shall bow down to you, faces to the ground, and lick the dust of your feet. Then you shall know that I am the Eternal, that none who trust in me are put to shame. Can spoil be taken away from a warrior? Can a victor's captives escape? And yet, says the Eternal One, the warrior's captives shall be taken away. The tyrant's spoil shall be retrieved. For I will contend with those who contend with you, and I will save your children. I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh. They shall be drunk on their own blood as though it were wine. And all flesh shall know that I, the Eternal, am your Savior, your Redeemer, the mighty one of Jacob. Where is your mother's bill of divorce with which I sent her away? Asked the Eternal One. Which of my creditors was it to whom I sold you? You were sold because of your own sins, but your own transgressions your mother was sent away. Why, when I came, was there no one there, no one to answer when I called? Is my hand really too weak to redeem? Do I lack the power to save? With my rebuke, I dry up the sea and turn rivers into desert. Fish stink from the lack of water and die on parched ground. I shroud the skies in blackness and make their clothing sackcloth. The eternal God has taught me to speak even to those tired of speech. Morning by morning, God awakens my ear, teaching me to listen. The eternal God opened my ear, and I did not rebel. I did not turn away. I gave my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who tore out my hair. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting, for the eternal God will help me, and therefore I feel no disgrace. But have set my face like flint, knowing that I shall not be put to shame. My champion is near. Who dare contend with me? Let us stand up together to be judged. Who are my adversaries? Let them confront me. With the eternal God to help me, who can declare me wrong? They shall wear out like a garment, like moth-eaten cloth. Who among the reverses the eternal and the respect the words of God's servant? Who walks in darkness, though he has no light? Who trusts in the eternal and leans upon God? But you, all of you, who kindle your own fire, who set torches alight, go walk by the blaze of your fire, by the torches you have lit. This comes to you from my hand. You shall not lie down in pain. Listen to me, all who pursue justice, all who seek the eternal. Look to rock from him which you were hewn, the quarry from which you were cut out. Look back to Abraham your father and to Sarah who bore you. When I called him, he was alone, but I blessed him and made him many. Just so the eternal will comfort Zion, comfort all her ruins, making her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the Eternal's garden, where joy and gladness are found, thanksgiving and the strains of song.
And the second blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman, ha'omer ve'oseh, ha'medaber u'mkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al hanvi'im ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu, likdusha v'limnucha, lechavod ultifaret, al hakol Adonai Eloheinu, anachnu modim lach, umvarchim otach, yitbarach shimcha b'fi chol tamid le'olam va'ed, baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh haShabbat. And so we turn now to words of Devar Torah. And I just realized as we interact, what might be the best way for people who are watching through technology to hear when we've had the microphone, the wireless microphone. I've heard some comments that said thank you, because when they watch the service and we have that discussion, they can hear the comments from those of you who hold the microphone, but now we don't have that. So what I'll do is I will kind of summarize. When you make a comment, I will summarize through the microphone just a little bit of what you share, because the truth of the matter is when we have the discussion, we learn from each other. And so all our voices are important. This morning I read from the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 17 through 24. Larry, are you looking for another wireless mic maybe in the back? Okay. So this morning's Torah portion, it says, "Should you say to yourselves, these nations are more numerous than we, how can we dispossess them? You need have no fear of them. You have but to bear in mind what your eternal God did to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians, the wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and portents, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm by which your eternal God liberated you. Thus will your eternal God do to all the peoples you now fear. Your eternal God will also send a plague against them until those who are left in hiding perish before you. Do not stand in dread of them, for your eternal God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. Your eternal God will dislodge those peoples before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them at once, else the wild beasts would multiply to your hurt. Your eternal God will deliver them up to you, throwing them into utter panic until they are wiped out. God will deliver their kings into your hand, and you shall obliterate their name from under the heavens. No one shall stand up to you until you have wiped them out." It's pretty uplifting speech, right? Moses is encouraging the people, don't worry, you're going to be scared, but remember, and it's interesting because he's speaking to them as if they experienced it, although it was probably their ancestors. You remember all those things God did for you when you were in Egypt, and how God has supported you through all these trials and tribulations, and God is going to continue to be there for you as you have to now about to enter this new land, and might fear the people whom we're now about to engage in some kind of battle in order to get possession of the land. What I noticed this year in looking at the Torah portion, Akev, is a repetition of this expression, Zeroa HaNetuya, an outstretched arm. So we had it in verse 19, the wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand, the outstretched arm by which your God liberated you. Thus will your eternal God do to all the peoples you now fear. And that was toward the beginning of the portion. In the middle of the portion, it repeats and says, "Yet they are your very own people, whom you freed with your great might and your outstretched arm." So that we have this reference of God freeing us with an outstretched arm. And then once again, toward the end of the portion in chapter 11, verse 2 and following, "Take thought this day that it was not your children who neither experienced nor witnessed the lesson of your eternal God, God's majesty, mighty hand, and outstretched arm, the signs and deeds that God performed in Egypt against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all his land, rolled what God did to Egypt's army, its horses and chariots, how back upon them the waters of the Sea of Reeds when they were pursuing you, thus destroying them once and for all." So we have this image of a Zeroa HaNetuya, this outstretched arm. And before I go into some of the interpretations, I thought it might be interesting to ask, when you hear this phrase, what is it that comes to mind? Maybe you've thought about it before because you've heard this expression, perhaps around the Seder table in the Haggadah, or maybe this is the first time you're drawing attention to it. What comes to mind when you hear this expression, Zeroa HaNetuya, an outstretched arm? And that's the question I have, and please feel free to share what your thoughts are, and I'll repeat them so others can hear. Goldie? Support. Okay. Larry?
Reaching out for one another.
So reaching out for one another, not necessarily God, as is described in the Torah, but reaching out for one another. Audrey? You're included. Like, okay, support. Other things. Sam?
Why is the parsha named Akev? It means heal, and it, at least to me, relates back to Jacob and Esau.
Okay, so there's a question, not directly related to specifically the Zerah and Tuya, but that you ask about why is the name of the Torah portion Akev, Ayin Kuf Vav, Vet, Ayin Kuf Vet, which reminds you of Jacob, because the word means heel, and as we know, Jacob, Yaakov, was named Jacob because he was holding the heel of his brother Esau as if he wanted to come out first. He wanted to be born first, but of the twins, he was born second, holding the heel. So, V'haya Akev Tishma'un, sometimes it does mean heel, or you can say, sometimes we use this expression, but not too often, on the heels of, right? So it's sort of a progression of what's going on. Like, Elu Divarim, these are the words. The Haya Akev, and on the heels of, if you want. So that's the interpretation. That's why this portion is named as such. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Other thoughts about Zroa Natuya, outstretched arm? Yes. Leading. Okay. Leading, support, reaching out for one another, including. So I want to share with you some things that I learned about Zroa and Natuya. There are many places in the Torah where we read about God in anthropomorphic terms, meaning we describe God in human descriptions. When I hear of Zroa and Natuya, I think of Pesach, but I also think of the Sistine Chapel, right? This image comes to mind, right, of the outstretched hand of Adam, and and God reaching out, right? But we see this not only 3 times in our Torah portion, but other times throughout our Torah, and it's often coupled with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, like they're paired together. And that is often in describing how God brought us out of the land of Egypt. And it's so interesting to have God have an outstretched hand. It makes me wonder, why does God have to have an outstretched hand? Was God just a little too far? That God had to reach across to get us? Or maybe was God right there and God's, pulling us closer. But it's a strange image about this outstretched arm. Is God too far away, or is God right there? And God reaching us. The arm being outstretched often expresses a gesture of extending beyond the normal efforts, right? When you stretch, it takes us out of our physical space, right? That we stretch in the morning, but if we're here, we're like, stretch. It puts me in a space a little bit beyond the space which I'm in. It implies an extension, maybe extra help, or extra help and caring in a time of need. And there's God's arm, and then there could also be human arms. When I hear Zroa Hanutuya, I think of the Zroa on the Seder plate, right? That's the shank bone, right? And yet in our Haggadah, we read about the Zroa Hanutuya, or the Yad Chazakav, the Hazroa Hanutuya, the strong hand and the outstretched arm, which refers to how God brought us out of Egypt. And then I also think of not only God's help historically, but maybe God's help which could be today. Although it's so hard with this anthropomorphic vision, it's I don't believe God has an arm or a hand, but that God might stretch out a little bit. Maybe I'm farther away in God giving me help.
When someone's drowning, an outstretched arm and a strong hand.
So when we're thinking about people, especially a person drowning, that outstretched arm and that strong hand is a lifesaver, literally. Yeah. And it's a great metaphor, too. Ibn Ezra describes this expression that happens earlier in Deuteronomy as a reference to Israel's departure by a high hand, which is interesting because I would not have thought of this. Oh, and the outstretched arm refers to the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. So that, if we've read that before in the Torah, that when the Israelites journeyed by day, they followed a pillar of cloud, and at night they followed a pillar of fire. So the outstretched arm, in Ibn Ezra's interpretation, is a way of showing how God's outstretched arm helped lead them. So somebody said leading as well as, or following, not just pulling out. According to Rabbeinu Bachya, both the mention of God's hand and mention of God's arm are references to the attribute of justice at work. The attribute of justice operates on different levels of intensity, however. Just as red wine comes in different shades of red, so the attribute of justice becomes manifest in different degrees of severity. The manifestation of a weak form of the attribute of justice presupposes that there must be a stronger form from which the weaker form derives its input. And so when they're saying justice, we're not like the social justice we think through, but meeting justice. And in the case of God with us in Egypt, bringing us out, it was offering the punishments, if you will, to the Egyptians, right? The signs and the portents that we had in that same sentence, those are the plagues. And I read another commentary, which I can't remember I think it might have been Rashi, talked about this like a sword. The outstretched arm is a sword in attacking enemies. I saw a hand over here. Michael.
Yeah, I don't know what it means, but when you punch, it's a strong hand with outstretched.
So when we think of what comes to mind for you is a punch. But a punch can't just be a strong hand. You have to stretch it out in order to get that punch. Thank you for sharing that image. Shifting from God's strength to human strength, I think of the outstretched arm not as a punishment, although there's two sides of it, right? The God side is a punishment for the enemies, but a bringing out of us. So there's attacking our enemies, but also bringing us out. In a human way, I think of an outstretched arm differently, Michael, than what you just mentioned, in the gesture, for example, of a handshake, right? Or if you've ever been on a hike and you're going with a group of people, and then you have to like step over or step up. You're supposed to turn around, you have to turn around and extend your arm to the person behind you. That's kind of what I'm thinking of. I think of it as, what comes to mind for me is sportsmanship, right? So at the end of a game in tennis, right, you see the two people go to the net and they shake hands, or a hockey game, the two teams line up toward the center ice, and they, even if they're not, extending their arm this way, but like a gesture of a high five, in a way of greeting one another in a friendly manner, or, good game. So what's really been interesting for me too is shaking hands is also the way we greet people often, right? As we say hello or we meet somebody for the first time, it's customary in our society to shake somebody's hand, and it's a gesture of friendliness. What's been very strange for me is during the pandemic, where we've been putting up all these kinds of protocols and safety measures, that the handshake went away for a while. You could bump elbows, right? Maybe even a fist bump, right? Not a punch, but a fist bump. But there's something that for me, I felt was really lost. My body, I could feel it in my body if I met somebody, and I'm trying to be safe. I have my mask on, and I'm meeting somebody, and I'm just saying hello. But there's something that, stiffened, because my inclination would be to put my hand out and say, nice to meet you. And then as that loosened, right, we could, use hand sanitizer or wash our hands afterward. Or we know that the COVID virus, the coronavirus, is passed through airborne, not necessarily through hands, although it's good to wash hands, right? Because if you cough in your hand and then shake somebody's hand. And then when I started shaking hands again, it also felt uncomfortable. Like, am I supposed to do this? Is this the safest thing for me? So this outstretched arm is something between human beings in this context of friendly and handshaking has just a heightened awareness for me in this new season of pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. And I'm still struggling with it and trying to figure out what it is that's right for me. And I think I'm leaning toward the side of handshaking because that's who I am inside, to greet people this way. And just remember, Amy, to wash your hands afterward. But I see that the outstretched arm as human beings to one another is something in which we're bringing people in, where it's hospitality, it's friendliness, it's a gesture of bringing people closer. And so I'm going to try to find my own comfort level with that, and hopefully can be who I am inside as I continue to use my outstretched arm toward other people. Shabbat Shalom. We turn now to, oh wait, you have a, okay. Haftarah, yes. Wait, say that page 1599, verse 16? 16. Okay. So the question Goldie asks is engraved you on the palms of my hand a tattoo? That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it. Because and we have to keep in mind that this is Isaiah speaking in God's voice, so it's not that Isaiah has engraved. And so this is, I think, another anthropomorphic reference of God engraving on God's hands. So, but God doesn't have hands, right? So I think when something is a tattoo, it's there, or something is engraved, it's etched in, right? So I think it's a metaphor for you are etched in me. Like, I'm not going to forget about you. That's how I would interpret it. But I don't know for sure. Michael.
Maybe God does have hands because he wrote on the tablets of stone with his finger.
Maybe God does have hands because he wrote on the tablets of the stone with his finger. So we don't know because we don't have the proof yet. When we have the proof back, then we'll share it with everybody. So interesting noticing, and it's nice because it's connected to hands and this whole anthropomorphic interpretations of God. Ivan, you have one more comment?
Not only don't we know, but this is the human reaching out for understanding. We don't know how to draw people out of error. We don't know how God does all this. So we put a hand on the picture. Because we understand that, but we really don't know. And it brings, I was quiet for a while, it brings to me, you don't really know. You either believe, or you don't believe. There is a force there that's helping you, or there is no force there helping you. And that's what you have to do.
So I'm just going to share some of those words about we don't know. And there's some people who believe and some people who don't believe. And I would add there are some people who are questioning in between, right? That's the agnostic. If I don't know, but if I could have proof one way or the other, that's the camp I would be in. But we don't know. And so for those who believe, we trust, we have faith. We turn now in our service to page 374 as we return the Torah to the ark. As we're able, we rise. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Kiniskav Shemo Levadu, Hodo Aleret, B'Shamayim, Vayarem Perem Yamo, Tehila Lechol Chasidav, Livnei Yisrael, Ankerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Ki lekach tov natati lachem, Torati al tazovu. Eitz chaim hi, lemav chasiki ba, v'tomchecha, me'ushar derachea, darkei Noam, v'chol v'tivoteha, shalom. Hashivenu Adonai, elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh Yameinu, Kekedem. We remain standing as we continue on page 586 for Ali. At the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shaber al Adon hakol, l'tekedu la'yotzer breshit, shelo asanu k'yoyei haratzot, v'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo samchokenu kahen, v'gor aleinu k'kol hamonan, v'anachnu kolim, v'mishtachavim u'motim, Livnei Melech, Malkei HaMashim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On page 591, may we gain wisdom in our lives overflowing like a river with understanding, loved each of us for the peace we bring to others, may our deeds exceed our speech, and may we never lift up our hand but to conquer fear and doubt and despair. Rise up like the sun, O God, over all humanity. Cause light to go forth over all the lands between the seas, and light up the universe with the joy of wholeness, of freedom, and of peace. V'ne'emar b'haya Adonai lemelech kol haaretz. Hayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad. U'shemo echad. As we turn our thoughts and prayers now to those who are no longer with us, we turn to pages 598 and 599 as we think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us. During this period of Shiva and Shloshim, we remember Shirley L. Lewis, mother of Kathy Wemmer, Harriet Ann LeWinter Rockland, sister of Myra Malamet, Gloria Goodman, cousin of Dave Fowler, as well as those who died in the season in years past, whose yahrzeits we observe on the Shabbat. We remember Jack Crawley, Hyman Isidore, Arthur Kalins, Esther Kimmel, Barbara Loeb, Sidney Marcus, James McGonigal, Jeffrey Pavel, Abraham Rosenberg, Simon Schnepper, Bernice Schwartz, Morris Steinberg, Bessie Steinberg, Jack Stern, Mark Stromwasser. If you're watching through the blessing of technology and want to add the names of your loved ones in the chat, please feel free to do so now. And for those who are in the sanctuary, if you have a